The sound of rain in Chicago isn't a drizzle. It's a rhythmic, heavy thud that feels like it's trying to break through the pavement. At 10:14 p.m. on a Tuesday, that sound was all I could hear as I stood on the landing of my third-floor apartment. My name is Vera Martinez. I'm 32 years old, a senior structural engineer, and a single mother to 2 children who, at this moment, were the only weight I felt I couldn't carry. I've spent my career studying how things hold together under pressure. I know that every structure has a limit, a point where the steel fatigues and the concrete begins to crumble. I just never expected the foundation of my own life to be sabotaged by the people who laid it. The key went into the lock, but the cylinder didn't budge. I tried again, my knuckles white, while Arlo, my 4-year-old, slumped against my shoulder. His skin was radiating a heat that frightened me. Lyra, my 6-year-old, was shivering beside me, her small hand clutching the hem of my damp coat. Then I saw it, a bright yellow notice taped just above the handle. It wasn't an eviction from a landlord. It was a formal withdrawal of the security deposit guarantee. My father, Harlan, had been the co-signer on this lease when I first moved back to the city. It was the only help he had ever offered, and even then, he'd made it feel like a loan I could never repay. Today, he had gone to the management office and clawed back the $4,000 deposit. I knew why. My sister Vera had mentioned a vintage 18th century porcelain tea set on her wedding registry that cost exactly that amount. To my father, a set of fragile cups for Vera's elite new life was worth more than a roof over his grandchildren's heads. Arlo let out a raspy, wet cough, the kind of sound that tells a mother the fever has settled deep into the lungs. It was 103 degrees. The hallway was freezing. I didn't feel rage. I felt the cold, clinical clarity of an engineer looking at a collapsed bridge. I realized the safety net hadn't just snapped. It had been cut. I carried the kids back down to my SUV. The heater barely hummed as I sat in the driver's seat, the windows fogging up with our shared breath. I dialed my mother, Myra. The phone rang 4 times. When she answered, the background was filled with the tinkling of crystal glasses and the smooth, distant hum of a string quartet. They were in Aspen, hosting a pre-wedding gala for Vera and her fiancé, the son of Sterling Fuentes. "Vera, why are you calling?" Myra's voice was sharp, hushed. "We are in the middle of dinner with the Fuentes family. You know how important this impression is." "Mom, Arlo has a 103-degree fever. We're locked out of the apartment. Harlan took the deposit for Vera's tea set." I kept my voice steady, professional. "I just need one night in the guest room, or even the storage room behind the garage, just until the pharmacy's open and I can get Arlo stabilized." There was a pause. I could hear someone in the background, my sister Vera, laughing. Then Myra spoke again, her tone dripping with a practiced, elegant disdain. "Vera, you have always been a weight around our necks. You're an uneducated hippo who can't even keep a roof over her own head, and now you want to bring your mess into Vera's moment? There is no room for street trash in this house tonight. Don't call again." The line went dead. I didn't pull the phone away from my ear immediately. Instead, I tapped the screen to stop the recording I had started the moment she answered. I watched the file save, evidence_01.mp4. I had been defined by their labels for 14 years. Ugly, useless, a shame to the name. I had allowed them to believe I was barely scraping by because it was easier than dealing with their greed. But a mother doesn't negotiate with people who treat her children like ghosts. "One porcelain tea set," I whispered to the empty car. "Just turned my children into strangers in their own grandfather's house." I drove to the Silver Star, a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away. The air inside smelled of burnt coffee and cheap floor wax. I sat Lyra in a booth and laid Arlo across the vinyl seat, covering him with my coat. I ordered 2 hot chocolates and opened my laptop. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read, Martha, looked at my cast-iron expression and Arlo's flushed face. She didn't ask questions. She just brought a bowl of ice and a clean cloth. "On the house," she said quietly. "Thank you, Martha," I replied. Kindness from a stranger felt more solid than anything my blood had ever offered. I logged into a high-level corporate portal. For the last year, I had been the lead consultant for the Fuentes Plaza project. My family didn't know I was the Dr. Martinez they spoke of with such reverence. They only knew I worked somewhere in construction. I navigated to the escrow account I had established 6 months ago. It was a gift, intended to finalize the payment for Vera's lavish Aspen wedding venue. $85,000 of my own hard-earned consulting fees, funneled through a trust to maintain the peace. With a steady finger, I hit the button. Rescind authorization. Reason for freeze. Dispute of beneficiary integrity. The red denied text flashed across the screen, reflecting in the raindrops sliding down the diner window. I proceeded to block Myra, Harlan, and Vera on every platform I owned. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing I had ever felt, but it was also the cleanest. My phone buzzed on the table. It wasn't my family. It was a notification from the Fuentes estate legal team. "Dr. Martinez, we have noted a sudden discrepancy in the wedding venue funding. Mr. Sterling Fuentes would like a private word regarding the Martinez family's liquidity before the morning briefing." I looked at Arlo, whose breathing was finally leveling out under the cool cloth. The bridge had fallen, but I was the one standing on the solid ground. Now let me take you back to the autumn of 2012 in the suburbs of Chicago. The leaves were turning a violent shade of red, a stark contrast to the sterile, monochromatic perfection inside our 4-bedroom colonial house. The air smelled of expensive lilies and floor wax, a scent that still makes my throat tighten. In that house, a single out-of-place book was treated like a stain, and my engineering textbooks were always out of place. My mother, Myra, treated the dinner table like a boardroom for social climbing. Every meal was a rehearsal for a life she felt we owed her. My father, Harlan, was a man whose silence was never a sign of peace, but a tactical withdrawal from anything that required a backbone. He didn't lead. He simply enforced the boundaries Myra drew. In our house, love wasn't a right. It was a high-yield investment. They valued the image of success far more than the person achieving it. We lived under a ranking system as rigid as any caste. Vera, my older sister, was the fine china. She was delicate, polished, and meant to be displayed. Myra spent thousands on her skin, her hair, and her social grace, breathing her in as if she were oxygen. I was the load-bearing wall. Practical, invisible, and expected to hold everything up without ever being noticed. I was the girl with the oversized glasses and the messy ponytail, the one who was managed while she was celebrated. The pattern wasn't built on a single event. It was woven into the fabric of our daily lives. In the spring of 2011, I won first place at the regional science fair for a bridge structural model I'd worked on for 6 months. I remember standing by my display, my hands tucked into my pockets to hide their shaking. Harlan and Myra arrived 40 minutes late because Vera had discovered a minor breakout before her cheerleading practice. They didn't even look at the trophy. Harlan checked his watch while Myra was busy on her phone, posting a photo of Vera's new cheer outfit. "Good job, Vera," my father said, his eyes already drifting toward the exit. "Put it in the garage so it doesn't clutter the foyer. Vera has a scout coming today. We need the house looking sharp." I carried that trophy to the garage and tucked it behind a stack of winter tires. I told myself it made sense. Vera was the one who could marry well. She needed the spotlight. I was strong. I could handle the dark. The breaking point arrived on the morning of my 18th birthday. I had spent 2 years building a portfolio, architectural drawings, structural stress tests, and my college application essays. It was my ticket out, my proof that I was more than a load-bearing wall. When I went to the backyard shed to retrieve it, I found the charcoal drawings and the typed pages shredded in the mud. Vera was standing by the kitchen window, sipping tea, her reflection smirking in the glass as she watched me kneel in the dirt. I walked into the house, dripping mud and clutching the ruins of my future. My mother didn't even look up from the suitcase she was packing for one of Vera's pageants. "You're an uneducated hippo, Vera," she said, her voice as casual as if she were commenting on the weather. "Look at you. You'll never be an architect. You're a shame to our family name. Take your bags and go find a life that fits your stature." Harlan stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere above my head. "It's for the best," he added. "We can't have your failures dragging Vera down." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I packed 2 trash bags with my belongings and walked to my 2003 Honda Civic. I had $42 in my pocket and a brain that could calculate the weight of the world, even if I couldn't yet find a place to stand on it. As I pulled out of the driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires, I caught a glimpse of Vera in the rearview mirror. She was holding an envelope, the thick, cream-colored one from the university I'd dreamed of. The one Myra told me had never arrived. Vera ripped it into confetti and tossed it into the wind, her laughter lost to the closed windows of the car. The steering wheel felt hard and cold in my hands, the only thing I truly owned. I told myself that being kicked out was the price of freedom. I believed that once the Martinez name was off my ID, I would no longer be their debt. But at the time, I didn't know that this help wasn't just kindness. It was a carefully planned trap. I stopped at a gas station 2 towns away, my hands finally starting to tremble. I opened my laptop to check my bank balance, hoping to see the $300 I'd saved from my part-time job. Instead, a notification popped up. A new line of credit had been opened in my name 3 days prior, authorized by my father's signature as a cosigner. The balance was already maxed out. Myra and Harlan hadn't just thrown me out. They had used my identity to fund Vera's lifestyle, leaving me with a debt I hadn't signed for and a name I could no longer escape. The city grew larger as I drove toward it. I felt smaller, but I was becoming denser. Integrity is the only thing that doesn't depreciate, and I was about to become the silent financier of the very people who called me trash. The warmth of a family's sudden interest is a potent drug. At 24, I was working 60-hour weeks at a junior firm while balancing a grueling master's program. I lived in a studio apartment where the radiator clanked all night and the only view was a brick wall. Then, a text arrived from Harlan. "Thinking of you. Your mother saw a coat today that looked like you. We'd love to see you for brunch this Sunday." The shift in temperature was disorienting. After years of being the ghost at the dinner table, I was suddenly being ushered into wood-paneled bistros where the lighting was amber and the voices were hushed. Harlan would pat my hand over expensive coffee, a gesture that felt like an anchor but functioned as a tether. I fell into the trap of oversharing. I told them about my promotions, my technical wins, and my growing expertise in seismic structural analysis. I wanted them to see that the uneducated hippo they had discarded was actually building the world they walked on. I thought Myra was finally seeing me. She was surgical with her questions. It was never, "Are you happy?" but rather, "What does a junior engineer make at a firm like yours?" Or, "Is your apartment in a safe zip code?" She memorized the dates of my pay raises and the names of my senior partners. At the time, I mistook her scrutiny for maternal concern. I didn't see her mapping my liquidity, checking the depth of the well before she started bailing out the water. The first request came on a rainy Tuesday. Harlan sounded breathless on the phone, mentioning Myra's heart palpitations and a temporary lapse in their supplemental health insurance. Vera, honey, just this once? It's $1,200 for a month. We'd never ask if it wasn't an absolute emergency. My hands shook as I authorized the wire transfer. I looked at my meager savings, the money I'd earmarked for my own professional exams, and told myself it was a small price for a seat at their table. It felt good to be the one they leaned on. It felt like power. Within 6 months, that one-time emergency morphed into a recurring $800 monthly supplement. Then came Vera's career bridge loan, another $1,500 a month to fund her art therapy retreats in Sedona. While I was bankrolling her search for inner peace, I was spending my nights in the basement of the MIT library. I completed my PhD in structural engineering in the dead of night, fueled by black coffee and the absolute necessity of a secret. I told no one in my family about the doctorate. If I were officially Dr. Martinez, the emergencies would have doubled. Myra would have argued that a woman with that much brain shouldn't be so stingy with her less fortunate sister. In the Martinez hierarchy, my intelligence was a utility, not an achievement. The escalation followed a predictable ladder. After the insurance came the house maintenance crises. A new roof, a failed furnace, a tax lien Harlan had forgotten to mention. The rule was simple. I was the first person they called for money, and the last person they called for support. When my own car's transmission died on a highway in the middle of winter, Myra was too stressed to answer her phone. When I ended up in urgent care with a kidney infection from overwork, Vera sent a sticker of a crying cat and asked if I'd sent the check for her yoga membership. I stopped expecting them to show up. Instead, I started keeping a file. On my laptop, hidden behind 3 layers of encryption, is a file named the Martinez Ledger. It's a cold black and white spreadsheet. Column A, date. Column B, amount. Column C, the lie. Column D, the recipient. I archived every screenshot of their emergencies and every wire confirmation. Over 10 years, the total was a staggering $284,500. I watched the red numbers climb while I lived on leftovers and wore the same coat for 5 winters. It was a silent, black ink survival. At a dinner to celebrate Vera's engagement to Michael Fuentes, Myra looked at my calloused hands and the tired shadows under my eyes. She reached out, her fingers manicured and soft, and touched my wrist. "It's good you have that technical brain, Vera. You're lucky. You certainly didn't inherit Vera's looks or my social grace, so you have to work twice as hard to be useful. It's your best quality." I didn't flinch. I just smiled, signaled the waiter, and paid the $300 check. I realized I had handed them the keys to my bank account and provided the ammunition for my own execution. I wasn't buying a family. I was merely renting my own dignity, and the lease was almost up. I was building a bridge for them, and I knew exactly where the structural limits were. When the snap finally came, I wouldn't be the one falling. October 14th, 2:14 p.m. 2 months before the wedding. I was on the 14th floor of the Fuentes Plaza construction site, standing on a temporary cantilevered platform. In the world of structural engineering, we talk about redundancy. The secondary systems that catch the load when the primary one fails. I was about to find out that in my own life, the redundancy was non-existent. The mechanism of the failure was simple, almost poetic. A temporary safety guardrail, supplied by Martinez Contracting, my father's firm, to optimize margins, sheared at the bolt line. There was a sickening metallic screech, the sound of rebar screaming under a load it wasn't meant to carry. Then, a 3-foot drop that lasted an eternity. My left shoulder slammed into a concrete pylon, and the world dissolved into the smell of pulverized limestone and the sharp, copper tang of my own blood. When I woke, the sky was a bruised purple. I was in the back of an ambulance, the rhythmic, agonizing pulse in my left arm keeping time with the beep of a heart monitor. A paramedic named Marcus was leaning over me, his hands steady as he checked my pupillary response. "Dr. Martinez, stay with me," he said. The grit of construction dust was like sandpaper in my mouth. "We're headed to Northwestern. I need an emergency contact. Your phone was unlocked." I didn't think about the pain. I thought about the clock. It was 3:45 p.m. I had exactly 75 minutes until Arlo's daycare closed, and Lyra's bus dropped her at an empty apartment. The terror of my children being alone was sharper than the break in my humerus. "The Martinez Legacy group chat," I whispered. "Call my mother. I just need someone to pick up the kids. 20 minutes, that's all." Marcus dialed. He put the phone on speaker while he prepped an IV. I heard the ringing, then Myra's voice, filtered through the high-end acoustics of a luxury bridal boutique in Aspen. "Vera, please," she sighed. "We are at the final fitting. Vera is literally pinned into a $20,000 custom silk veil. The Fuentes family is watching. Do not start with your dramatic accidents today." "Mom, I'm in an ambulance. I'm going into surgery for a shattered shoulder. I need you to get the kids, just for 2 hours." Harlan's voice drifted in from the background, jovial and distant. "Figure it out, Vera. We have a dinner reservation at 6 with Sterling's brothers. You're always a nuisance when things are going well for your sister." Then came the notification ping. A message appeared in the thread, visible on the screen Marcus was holding. It was from Harlan. "Always looking for a spotlight, even if she has to fall for it." Marcus looked at the screen, then at me. His jaw tightened. He didn't say a word. He took his own phone out, snapped a photo of the Martinez Legacy thread, and tucked it back into his pocket. "For your records," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You might need this for the OSHA report. I'll be your witness." While the ambulance wove through the heavy Chicago loop traffic, I stared at the ceiling. I reached out with my good hand and scrolled through the wedding portfolio Vera had emailed the family earlier that morning to brag about her contributions to the Fuentes empire. I opened a PDF titled Innovative Green Structural Layout, V. Martinez. The breath left my lungs. It wasn't just a layout. It was my MIT thesis. Every stress load calculation, every proprietary fluid damper specification I had developed in my 20s. Vera hadn't just been stealing my money for 10 years. She had been harvesting my mind. She was building her marriage on the stolen bones of my intellect, presenting my genius as her own to impress a man like Sterling Fuentes. The ambulance doors opened to the sterile white lights of the ER. I was pushed through the double doors, the smell of rubbing alcohol and floor wax welcoming me back to a world of procedures. By 4:22 p.m., I was being prepped for surgery. Nurse Chen handed me a clipboard for the ER intake form. I looked at the next of kin section. It was blank. I didn't cry. I asked for my phone and called an elite emergency nanny service. I authorized a $300 same-day surge fee and a $50 an hour rate to ensure Arlo and Lyra were picked up, fed, and bathed. "It's worth every penny," I told Nurse Chen as she started the anesthesia. "I'm paying for the one thing my family doesn't have: integrity." The surgery lasted 4 hours. I woke up with a titanium plate in my shoulder and a hospital bill that would eventually total $4,200, the exact amount Harlan had borrowed from me for his country club dues the previous week. I spent 3 days in a fog of white-hot pain and the rhythmic beep of the monitor. I filled out police report number CH-8821 regarding the faulty equipment and signed the OSHA incident log 14-B. I kept every discharge paper, every bill estimate, and every log of the Martinez Legacy chat. On the day I was released, I stood at the hospital exit, my arm in a heavy black sling, waiting for an Uber I had paid for myself. My phone didn't ring. There were no get-well texts, no check-ins. Just a photo Vera posted on Instagram of a champagne toast in Aspen, captioned, "Perfect families aren't born. They're built." Marcus, the paramedic, happened to be dropping off another patient. He saw me standing there and walked over, handing me a cold bottle of water. "You got the paperwork?" he asked. "Every page," I replied. "Good. Don't let them rewrite this." Strangers showed up. My family didn't. Strangers took better care of my children and my broken bones than the people who shared my DNA. That was the day I understood I wasn't their daughter. I was their casualty. And casualties have a way of becoming the very thing that brings an empire down. The temporary apartment I secured on the north side of Chicago was quiet, the kind of silence that has mass and weight. It was 4 days after the surgery, and the blue light of a Midwestern dawn was just starting to filter through the blinds, casting long, geometric shadows across the floor. I sat on the edge of the bed, the dull ache in my left arm a constant, rhythmic reminder of the titanium plate now bolted to my bone. The smell of antiseptic from my fresh bandages mixed with the aroma of a cold cup of black coffee on the nightstand. I looked at my reflection in the darkened screen of my laptop. For 14 years, I had accepted their definition of me. I had carried the label of the uneducated hippo like a heavy, ill-fitting coat, believing that if I just worked harder, if I just gave more, the fabric of my family would eventually hold. But looking at the bruises on my skin and thinking of my children sleeping in the next room, a new thought took root. It was the clinical clarity of a structural engineer. I had spent my life trying to patch a bridge that was designed to collapse. In engineering, when a structure is beyond repair, you don't keep adding bracing. You perform a controlled demolition to save the surrounding area. I had two options: keep paying for their lies or stop the bleeding. I chose to build. I reached for my phone with my good hand and opened my banking app. I navigated to the Recurring Transfers tab. It was an extortion calendar, a digital ledger of my own submission. There they were, staring back at me in cold digital ink. $1,200 for emergency repairs that never happened. $800 for medical supplements that actually paid for Harlan's vintage car parts. $2,500 for Vera's art studio, a space she used only to house her vanity and her couture. My finger didn't tremble this time. I moved with the same precision I used when signing off on a high-rise foundation. The cut was systematic. Action 1. Cancel recurring wire transfer to Harlan Martinez. Confirmed. Action 2. Remove Myra Martinez as an authorized user on the secondary credit card. Confirmed. Action 3. Rescind the co-signature for Vera's car lease via the dealership portal. Confirmed. Action 4. Reset all passwords. Enable two-factor authentication on every corporate and personal account. Confirmed. There were no dramatic speeches, no final, tearful phone calls. It felt like setting down a heavy bag of stones I had been carrying uphill since I was 18. Just relief. The silence that followed wasn't a void. It was a sanctuary. A soft knock at the door broke the stillness. It was Kellen, my senior partner at the firm. He walked in carrying a box of files and a bag of fresh croissants. He looked at my sling, then at the laptop screen I had just closed. He sat in the chair across from me, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp. "How are you, really?" Kellen asked. "Better," I replied, my voice level. For the first time in years, I've stopped negotiating with people who think my worth is tied to their convenience. Kellen didn't offer a platitude. Instead, he dropped a thick manila folder onto the coffee table. The label read, "Audit of Martinez Assets, Confidential." "This is the smoking gun, Vera. he said quietly. I opened the folder. The numbers told a story that Myra and Harlan would never admit to the Fuentes family. My father's firm was $400,000 in debt. They had been using my credit score and my identity for years to secure bridge loans, funneling the money into a life they couldn't afford. They were keeping Vera's socialite image alive on a foundation of fraud. They'll notice the money is gone before they notice my heart is gone, I said, closing the folder. That was the plan. Kellen nodded. Sterling Fuentes is already asking why the escrow for the Aspen venue has been frozen. He's a man who values structural integrity above all else. He wants the lead engineer on site for a final audit before the wedding ceremony. I looked out the window. The city was waking up, the steel and glass of the skyline catching the first rays of the sun. I knew the fallout was coming. I knew that within 48 hours, the pre-wedding cocktail party in Aspen would turn cold when the cards were declined, and the truth began to leak through the cracks. I began to pack my bag for Colorado. I didn't pack a bridesmaid dress. I packed my structural auditor's badge and the folder Kellen had brought me. I had lived in the shadows of their narrative for too long. I was the one who understood the physics of the fall, and I was no longer afraid of the height. I thought the silence would be the hard part. But as I zipped my suitcase, I realized the silence wasn't a void. It was an ambush. The rhythm of a new life is a quiet thing, built with the steady precision of a clock's internal gears. By Friday morning, my small Chicago kitchen smelled of cinnamon pancakes and wood polish. I watched my daughter, Lyra, carefully coloring within the lines of a map at the table. Arlo was stacking wooden blocks on the floor, his breathing finally clear of the raspy wetness that had terrified me in the ER. The stability felt earned, yet a sharp, cold ache persisted between my ribs. It wasn't regret. It was a structural reminder of the night in the rain, triggered every time Arlo cleared his throat. I counted the 3 plates on the table and noted the empty 4th chair. In engineering, we call it a void, an intentional space left to allow for expansion or to prevent the transfer of stress. For 14 years, I had tried to fill that void with my own sacrifice. Now, I simply let it be. The morning sun hit the frost on the window, creating intricate, crystalline patterns that looked like the blueprint for a cathedral. Beautiful, but only possible because of the cold. At 9:14 a.m., my phone vibrated on the granite counter. It was Kellen. His voice was scalpel-sharp, stripped of the usual morning pleasantries. Vera, the escrow freeze hit the Martinez accounts like a wrecking ball, Kellen began. Harlan has spent the last 3 hours trying to leverage his influence to bypass the lock, but the bank isn't budging without your signature. More importantly, Sterling Fuentes just saw the preliminary structural report for the Silver Peak extension, the one your sister Vera submitted under her own name. And? I asked, my voice steady. The structural red flag you mentioned? The one you coded into your early thesis? It's there, clear as day. Sterling is a man who built an empire on the integrity of his foundations. He doesn't trust the math. He's demanded a lead engineer from the State Commission to perform an emergency site audit today, before the pre-wedding gala begins. He wants the person who understands the steel. At 10:02 a.m., there were 3 measured raps on my door. I looked through the peephole to see a man in a charcoal suit holding a heavy manila envelope. A courier. I opened the door, signed the electronic pad, and took the document. Inside was proof object number 4, the official site inspection order. It bore the gold-embossed seal of the Illinois State Building Commission and a handwritten note from Sterling Fuentes himself. It read, Dr. Martinez, I value the hidden framework more than the facade. Please come to Aspen. The integrity of my son's future depends on it. I looked at the paper, then at the suitcase I had already begun to pack. I wasn't being invited to a wedding as a sister. I was being summoned to a reckoning as an authority. Facts don't need an invitation. They only need an audience. The kinetic shift was rapid. A 45-minute flight from O'Hare, followed by a 20-minute drive up the salt-crusted, winding roads of Aspen. My SUV maintained a steady 65 miles per hour as the air grew thinner and the temperature dropped to a biting 18 degrees. I arrived at the Silver Peak Resort at 4:12 p.m. The entrance was a sea of white snow, black luxury vehicles, and guests draped in furs. I stepped out of the car, not in a silk gown, but in a tailored charcoal trench coat. My silver structural auditor badge was clipped firmly to my lapel, catching the dying light of the mountain sun. Vera was on the heated veranda, surrounded by bridesmaids in pale pink. She was draped in white faux fur, holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne. When she saw me, her face didn't soften. It contorted into a mask of mockery. She laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that cut through the mountain air. "Vera, are you serious?" Vera called out, loud enough for the nearby elite to hear. "Did you hitchhike all the way to Aspen to beg for your allowance? Look at you, still the same messy hippo trying to ruin a beautiful moment. Security! Get her out of here before she makes the Martinez name a joke in front of the Sterlings." Myra and Harlan rushed through the glass doors, their faces pale but their eyes burning with the old venom. "Vera, stop this madness," Harlan hissed, stepping toward me. "You are an uneducated embarrassment. You have no right to be on this property. Go back to your street trash life before I have you arrested for trespassing." Myra didn't speak. She just looked at me with a pitying disgust, as if I were a crack in a perfect marble floor. The glass doors slid open again. This time, it was Sterling Fuentes. He walked with the heavy, unhurried pace of a man who owned the ground he stood on. He didn't look at Vera. He didn't acknowledge Harlan's frantic attempts to explain. He walked straight to me. 5 seconds of absolute, measured silence fell over the veranda. I stood my ground, my back as straight as the load-bearing pillars I had spent my life designing. Vera Martinez was no longer a ghost. I was the person with the data. Sterling looked at the badge on my chest, then at the black folder in my hand. He extended his hand to me, ignoring the gasps from my family. "Dr. Martinez?" Sterling said, his voice carrying the weight of a judge delivering a verdict. "Thank you for making the trip on such short notice. My legal team and the building inspectors are waiting in the boardroom. We have much to discuss regarding the integrity of the contributions this family has made to our expansion." He turned his head slightly toward my parents, his eyes cold. "It seems appearances can be quite deceiving. Myra, Harlan, I believe your daughter is here to conduct an audit. And in my world, the auditor always has the final word." Vera's crystal flute slipped from her fingers, shattering on the heated stone. Myra's hand remained frozen in midair, her mouth agape. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply nodded to Sterling and walked past them into the warmth of the resort. The silent, heavy burden of truth finally fell into the snow, and I was not the one to bear it. The business center of the Silver Peak Resort was a sanctuary of glass and mahogany, smelling faintly of toner and expensive stationery. It was 3 hours before the pre-wedding gala began. The heavy-duty printer hummed a steady, rhythmic tune, spitting out pages that felt warm to the touch. Bank statements, archived emails from 2012, digital captures of the Martinez legacy thread, and the notarized structural audit of Fuentes Plaza. I moved with the deliberate precision of an engineer conducting a final inspection. I snapped the rings of a heavy black leather binder open and began sliding the pages into plastic sleeves. I applied color-coded tabs with steady fingers. Financial ledger, structural liability, evidence of IP theft. My hands bore a slight tremor, a physical reaction to the oxygen-thin air and the weight of the contents. But my mind was clear. Building this folder wasn't about winning an argument. It was about ensuring the history of my survival could no longer be edited by the people who had tried to erase it. Kellen stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the snow fall over the jagged peaks of Aspen. He held the summary page I had prepared. $400,000, Vera, he said, his voice flat, devoid of the shock that usually accompanied such a figure. That is the cost of the lifestyle they've siphoned from your accounts over the span of a decade. All while calling you a burden to the Martinez name. He walked over and handed me a high-end fountain pen, his gaze anchoring mine. You have the truth, Dr. Martinez. Let the paper do the talking. You won't need to raise your voice once. I tucked the binder under my arm. Arlo and Lyra were safe in the suite with Kellen's wife, provided with coloring books and the promise of room service hot chocolate. I felt the ghost of Lyra's small hand clutching my sleeve as I walked toward the elevators. That was the only motivation I required. A vibration hummed against my thigh. I pulled out my phone to see a text from a distant cousin, Lena, who had always been the family's unofficial switchboard. Vera, Myra is in the ballroom telling everyone you've had a mental breakdown. She's claiming you're obsessively stalking the wedding because you can't handle Vera's success. They're warning the Fuentes family not to engage with you. Be careful. The labels were already being set. Erratic, sensitive, breakdown, confused. It was a classic move to discredit the witness before the testimony could begin. I slipped the phone into my pocket. Gaslighting only works when the victim doubts their own reality. I had the ledger. My reality was documented in black and red. The doors to the grand ballroom opened to a vista of crystal chandeliers and a sea of tuxedos. The string quartet played a muted Vivaldi, the notes shivering through the air. The smell of lilies was overwhelming, a cloying floral mask for the coldness of the room. As I entered, I felt the atmospheric shift. Conversations didn't stop, but they curved away from me. Eyes drifted, lingering just long enough to register the charcoal trench coat and the black binder before darting away with a mixture of pity and suspicion. It felt like a public execution disguised as a celebration. Myra approached first. She was draped in a strand of pearls that my overtime hours at the firm had paid for 3 years ago. She wore a tragic, practiced smile. Vera, dear, she began, her voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. You look tired. Are you feeling better? We were all so worried about your episode in Chicago. I looked her in the eye, maintaining a boundary as solid as a retaining wall. I am here for the audit, Mrs. Martinez. I am certain you received the legal notice regarding the escrow freeze. The use of Mrs. Martinez stripped the blood tie from our interaction, turning it into a cold, professional transaction. Myra's smile faltered, her fingers instinctively reaching for her pearls. Nearby, Vera was the center of a circle of bridesmaids. She spoke with a performative, hushed tone, her eyes fixed on me. It's so incredibly sad. My sister has always struggled with the truth. Ever since that accident at her job, she's been quite dramatic. We're just trying to help her get through the evening without a scene. The guests whispered behind silk fans. A waiter avoided my eye as he passed with a tray of champagne. I stood near a fluted marble pillar, observing the room. Integrity is a quiet quality. It doesn't need to compete with the volume of a lie. Sterling Fuentes caught my eye from the head table. He was a man who understood that a building is only as strong as the soil beneath it. He noted the binder. He didn't smile, but he gave a single, slow nod, a silent authorization to proceed. He stood up, preparing to approach the gold-leafed podium for the official family union speech. Panic flashed across Harlan Martinez's face. He saw the tide shifting. He didn't wait for Sterling to reach the microphone. Harlan intercepted him, rushing to the stage with a desperate, frantic energy. Harlan grabbed the mic, his face a mask of false fatherly concern. his voice booming through the hall. Before our esteemed host begins, the Martinez family has a difficult announcement. As many of you have heard, our youngest daughter is currently navigating a tragic mental crisis. We ask for your grace and your silence as we handle this private shame. Vera smirked from her seat, believing the narrative was finally locked. The room went silent, every pair of eyes turning toward me, waiting for the breakdown my father had promised. I didn't give it to them. I took one slow, measured step forward, the black leather of the binder gleaming under the sharp light of the chandeliers. I opened the first tab of the ledger. The grand ballroom of the Silver Peak Resort was a masterpiece of cold aesthetics. The scent of white lilies was thick enough to taste, and the high-altitude air conditioning emitted a low, metallic hum that seemed to vibrate in the crystal of the chandeliers. A string quartet in the corner played a muted Vivaldi, the music feeling like a thin veil over the growing pressure in the room. I was not center stage. I stood near a fluted marble pillar at the edge of the crowd, the black leather binder tucked under my left arm. I was a shadow in a room filled with light. I sipped from a glass of sparkling water, watching a single bubble rise slowly to the surface, fighting the weight of the liquid. Gravity is the only thing in this world that never lies. It is constant, predictable, and eventually, it brings everything down. Harlan Martinez stood at the gold-leafed podium, silhouetted against the dark mountain peaks visible through the glass. He leaned into the microphone, his voice carrying that practiced, tragic tremolo he used when he wanted a jury to feel pity. "We ask for your patience tonight," Harlan said, his eyes scanning the gathered elite of Chicago and Aspen. "Our youngest daughter, Vera, she has always struggled with the truth of her own limitations. We have spent 14 years carrying her failures, hiding her setbacks to protect the Martinez name. Even tonight, in her state of mental crisis, we offer her our silent grace. We only ask that you do the same." The reaction was immediate. The Sterling family and their peers offered small, sympathetic nods. I watched Vera, draped in her $20,000 silk veil, adjust her posture to look like a saint suffering for a difficult sibling. Harlan thought he was winning. He thought he was locking the vault. He didn't realize he had just spent the last 3 minutes building his own gallows. I remained silent. I didn't interrupt. I didn't shout. I simply watched how the guests avoided my pillar, the smear campaign successfully turning me into a ghost. The silence in the room was a heavy, suffocating thing, but I held my rhythm. Sterling Fuentes stood up from the head table. He didn't look at Harlan. He looked directly at me. "Mr. Martinez," Sterling's voice cut through the room like a cold front. "You speak of carrying your daughter. But the documentation I reviewed in the boardroom this afternoon suggests the weight was moving in the opposite direction. Perhaps we should allow the records to speak for themselves." I walked to the AV booth at the side of the hall. I didn't ask for permission. I plugged my tablet into the interface. The giant LED screens at either end of the ballroom flickered, then stabilized. There were no family photos. There were no sentimental montages. There was only a ledger. Title: Structural Support Audit, Martinez vs. Martinez, 2012 to 2026. The room went so quiet I could hear the furnace click in the walls. I scrolled through the pages with a steady thumb. "In the span of 12 years, I said, my voice level and professional, amplified by the hall's acoustics, the uneducated daughter has served as the primary financier for the Martinez lifestyle. Line 1, 2012 to 2015. Direct tuition payments for Vera Martinez. Art history degree. Total, $142,000. Source, Vera Martinez Consulting. Line 2, 2018 to 2022. Mortgage subsidies for the Martinez Colonial Estate. Total, $98,000. Source: Vera Martinez, Structural Audits. Line 3, 2026, last Tuesday. Harlan Martinez, escrow withdrawal of tenant security deposit, $4,000, for porcelain wedding gift. The proof appeared in high definition, bank-stamped wire transfers, notarized loan agreements, and the escrow rescission notice. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. The elite were no longer smiling. They were repulsed. To this crowd, debt was a stain, but being a parasite on your own child's labor was a social death sentence. "This is a fabrication!" Harlan's voice broke, raw and jagged. He turned to the crowd, his face a mottled gray. "She's a hippo playing with numbers. She's trying to destroy us because she's jealous of Vera." I tapped one final file on the screen. An audio capture. The recording from Tuesday night filled the ballroom. Myra's voice, cold as an Aspen glacier, echoed off the crystal. "There is no room for street trash in this house tonight. Maya is 6. She can sit in the rain. Don't call again." Then the final image. A screenshot of the Martinez Legacy group chat. The emoji Harlan had sent while I was being prepped for surgery at the ER Sterling Fuentes stood again. He turned to his son, Michael. The Fuentes name does not merge with street trash. Not the daughter, but the parents who produced this rot. Sterling gestured to the resort security waiting at the doors. "The wedding is canceled. I want the Martinez party off this property in 15 minutes. Your luggage will be sent to the curb." I took the microphone. This was the only time I would speak to them as a unit. "I didn't come here to win a fight," I said, looking at Myra and Harlan. "I came to close a transaction. For 14 years, you defined me as a burden so you could eat from my hand. That ends tonight. I have filed for a full legal dissociation. From this moment on, you are no longer Martinez to me. You are just a group of people I used to know. That is the boundary." I closed the binder. The snap of the leather was the final punctuation mark of my childhood. I walked to the podium and placed my glass of water right where Harlan's hand was shaking. The elite guests were already turning their backs. A slow, coordinated retreat of silk and tuxedos. No one looked at Vera. No one offered Myra a tissue. I walked out of the ballroom, my spine perfectly aligned. As the heavy doors closed behind me with an expensive, muffled thud, I felt the phantom weight of the binder leave my hands. The structure eventually collapsed, and I was the one who had to walk away from the rubble. The morning after the gala dawned with a clarity that felt almost clinical. At 6:15 a.m., the resort suite was hollow, the air inside smelling of mountain pine and the faint, lingering scent of white lilies. I zipped my suitcase, a short metallic sound that seemed to echo in the emptiness. I placed the room key on the mahogany nightstand and stood for a moment, looking at the door. In the lobby, the shift in the social order was absolute. The staff didn't whisper or look away anymore. They simply stepped aside, offering the quiet, professional distance reserved for someone they recognized as an equal. I saw Harlan sitting in the corner of the breakfast room. His shoulders were slumped, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long since gone cold. No one sat with him. Myra was nowhere to be seen. Near the trash bin in the hallway, I spotted a tangle of white silk, Vera's $20,000 veil, discarded and forgotten like a shed skin. The structural collapse of their facade was complete. As I waited at the valet stand, a distant aunt, someone who had looked past me for a decade, approached. She didn't offer a dramatic apology. She just looked at my arm in its sling and then into my eyes. "I didn't know about the night in the rain, Vera," she said quietly. "I'm sorry we let that happen." I gave a single, measured nod. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about the acknowledgement that the lie no longer had a grip on our history. The crisp, biting Aspen air finally felt like it belonged in my lungs. During the flight back to Chicago, my phone vibrated in my pocket. 14 missed calls. A flurry of texts from Vera. "How could you do this? You ruined my life over a few $1,000s. Then one from Myra. "You have shamed the name Martinez forever. Come back and tell Sterling you lied." I didn't type a response. I didn't send more evidence or try to explain the physics of their own greed. I simply tapped the red block button on all 3 numbers. Back in my new office on Monday morning, I opened the Martinez ledger on my laptop. I highlighted every row, 14 years of red ink, interest payments, and silent sacrifices. I didn't archive it for a future lawsuit. I didn't save it as a trophy of my victory. I hit the delete key and emptied the trash. I executed one final transfer from my private consulting account to my children's college savings fund, the exact amount I used to send to Harlan every month. I didn't need them to repent to be free. I only needed to stop paying the price for an approval that was never for sale. 3 months have passed. My life is mundane now, and there is a profound beauty in that. I listen to the sound of Arlo and Lyra laughing in the back seat of the car as I drive them to the park on a Saturday morning. There are no raspy coughs, no fevers, no yellow eviction notices taped to the door. For years, I believed I was the uneducated hippo. I believed I was the burden. Today, I am just Vera, a woman who knows exactly how to build things that last. I am the architect of my own peace, and the foundation is solid. If you are carrying a weight that was never yours to bear, I want you to know something. You can put it down. You don't need their permission to be whole. I looked out at the Chicago skyline this morning and saw the Fuentes Plaza Tower rising in the distance. It is straight, strong, and perfectly aligned with the horizon. The world didn't end when I told the truth. It just finally turned in the right direction.